Hey everybody, it's award season, which means that this weekend features several movies either opening in limited release or expanding into wider release that are getting major awards buzz. So I decided to do my best to let you know which ones to seek out. This is our latest Screen Junkies review roundup. Hey, I'm Dan Murrell, and I am super excited to pass along some recommendations that I hope will help you navigate a very crowded movie marketplace. First up is a movie that's expanding into wide release this weekend, The Hate U Give. The film is from director George Tillman Jr., based on the novel by Audrey Wells, and with a screenplay from writer Angie Thomas, who sadly passed away from cancer just a couple of weeks ago. It tells the story of Star, a black high school student who witnesses her unarmed childhood friend Khalil's shooting death at the hands of a white police officer during a traffic stop. As outrage grows over his death, Star has to decide if she will speak out as the sole eyewitness to the incident. Now, I think movies at their best don't just show you something, they can also transport you somewhere, putting you into the shoes of the characters on screen. And I think that's where The Hate U Give's biggest strengths lie. The anger, fear, and sense of injustice felt by the characters in this film are things that are felt every single day, as evidenced by both the passionate protests in this film and by the real-life Black Lives Matter movement here in the US. These are also experiences that aren't shared across all racial lines. For example, as a white man, I've never had to have the kind of conversation that opens this film, as Russell Hornsby's character, Mav Carter, instructs his children on what to do when the police pull them over in order to avoid being arrested or killed. Now, these conversations happen every day, and by dramatizing them in a very straightforward and powerful manner, The Hate U Give seeks not only to inform, but to transform, using Star as the audience's key to a world many of us have never experienced. Amanda Stenberg as Star gives a strong lead performance that has established her as a sleeper awards contender, and she definitely carries the weight of the film on her shoulders, not only in the scenes where she struggles with Khalil's death, but in her search for her own sense of self as she juggles her identity when she's at home with her identity at her private, predominantly white high school. The film also contains strong supporting performances by Regina Hall, Anthony Mackie, Algie Smith, and Common, among others. Now, I found a lot of what The Hate U Give had to say to be very powerful and also illuminating. It does attempt to cover a lot of ground, though, and by the end, I felt that the film's central message was fighting for room with a lot of the other themes and issues that the movie wanted to address, which a lot of times is an issue in adapting a much longer book to the big screen. Its core message, though, is still powerful, and I would definitely recommend this film, both as a mirror to the society we currently live in, and for those whose everyday realities don't mirror what's shown on the screen, an important look outside of our own communities and into the lives of others, which is an important role that film can play, and hopefully one that will promote awareness, understanding, and empathy. The Hate U Give has been in limited release for the past 2 weeks, and it spans nationwide this weekend. Next up is another film that's been gathering awards buzz, Beautiful Boy, starring Steve Carell and Timothée Chalamet as real-life father and son David and Nick Sheff. Beautiful Boy is the true story of Nick's years-long struggle with drug addiction and the efforts of David and his family to pull him out of the spiral. Now, this is the kind of movie that has had Oscar written all over it from its very inception, and I think that ends up working against it in the long run. Beautiful Boy seems very aware that it's intended to be a powerful film, so much so that director Felix van Groningen hammers us over the head with music and editing choices that practically scream at us to acknowledge the bleakness of what's happening on screen. And I think it's ultimately unnecessary because Timothée Chalamet's performance provides all the pathos necessary. He could very easily have taken this role too far into hammy self-parody, but he grounds Nick with a simmering pain that saves the entire film from fully transforming into basically just a prestige after-school special. Steve Carell does the best with what he's allowed to do, but it feels like he's too often being pushed to act as sad and mopey as possible with little to no nuance. And his character isn't well-rounded enough to justify the extreme measures he goes through in certain parts of the film, often neglecting the other members of his family, such as his wife, Maura Tierney, and their 2 kids, and treating his ex-wife and Nick's mother, played by Amy Ryan, with an almost unforgivable amount of loathing and contempt. It's completely fine for films to have flawed characters, but when their characters were being asked to root for, there also has to be some sense of accountability for those flaws, and I never got that from this film. Another story about addiction that came out this year, Don't Worry, He Won't Get Far on Foot, hits a lot of the same beats as this movie, but that one transcended its cliches with several strong performances, notably from Joaquin Phoenix and Jonah Hill, and a story that followed its lead character through a complete spiritual journey. Beautiful Boy seems fixated on the anguish and misery of addiction, then skips or omits entire portions of Nick's story that allow us to see his progression as a character. And yes, while addiction is often a painful cycle of recovery and relapse in real life, these repeated beats come too often in the film with too little else to offer besides that for me to recommend Beautiful Boy as a whole. It is, however, not the fault of its actors, and if there is a redeeming factor or a reason to seek the film out, it's the fine performances of its ensemble, with Chalamet as the anchor of the film. I also think that those who have struggled with addiction or know someone who has will likely find this to be a very powerful and painful experience. I just don't know if the end result will justify the pain it contains. Beautiful Boy debuted on 4 screens last weekend and will continue to expand its release over the next several weeks. I mentioned Jonah Hill earlier. Speaking of Jonah, his debut film as a director, mid-90s, begins its theatrical run this weekend in limited release. Hill, who also wrote the film, sets his first film in Los Angeles in the 1990s as it follows Stevie, a 13-year-old who begins growing up very quickly when he starts hanging around the LA skateboarding scene. Stevie is played by Sonny Soljic, who had a memorable part in last year's The Killing of a Sacred Deer, and the cast is rounded out by veteran actors like Lucas Hedges and Katherine Waterston as Stevie's brother and mother, as well as newcomers like Nicole Smith and Olin Prinett, who play 2 of Sonny's friends who find themselves at odds with each other over where they want their lives to go. A lot of the elements of this film, from its coming-of-age genre to the LA setting to the choice to set it in the 90s, set the table for what could have been a very self-indulgent film from a first-time director, one that sees the world through an overly myopic and self-aware lens. But I was actually really surprised with the confidence of Jonah Hill's direction. Mid-90s is not a very flashy film. In fact, it's shot in the square Academy 4:3 ratio, like an old television, a creative choice that makes sense given the intimacy of its characters and their relationships. The smaller frame allows us to feel closer to them, creating a more observational effect and less of a cinematic one. It's the right choice for the film and a sign that Hill smartly crafted the look and feel of the movie. Now, Jonah Hill's worked with a lot of prominent directors, including Martin Scorsese and the Coen brothers, but he stays focused on developing his own style instead of cribbing from other filmmakers. Now, I don't think Mid-90s is a perfect film or one that's going to be on a lot of the best of the year lists, but I think it's an impressive debut and would have been one of those without Jonah Hill's resume as an actor prior to making this movie playing into it. It's well shot, it's well acted, it's funny, it's often engaging, and I walked out looking forward to what Jonah Hill's next film would be and how he's going to evolve as a filmmaker. Mid-90s opens in limited release this weekend and will expand its release in the coming weeks. Now, expanding into about 600 theaters this weekend is Fox Searchlight's The Old Man and the Gun, starring Robert Redford, and what he has announced will be his farewell performance. Redford plays real-life bank robber Forrest Tucker, a lifelong criminal nearing the end of a storied crime spree that includes multiple jailbreaks and bank robberies. Forrest is tempted to leave his life of crime when he meets Jewel, played by Sissy Spacek, a rancher who's completely unaware of what Forrest actually does for a living. The film is directed by David Lowery, who also made the Peach Dragon remake and last year's A Ghost Story. I enjoyed The Old Man and the Gun, but I also don't think it's one that everyone necessarily has to rush to the theater to see. It's no news that Robert Redford is a charming actor, and his charisma works really well for the character of Forrest, who got away with so many of his crimes because of his charm and kindness. Redford is a good fit for this role because we want to like him as an audience in the same way that so many of the bank employees he held up liked him as a person. Natural magnetism is the appeal of both the actor and the character. Redford and Spacek's romance is sweet and honest in the way that it faces the realities of meeting someone later in life whom you later find yourself drawn to. And I'd recommend this film, but it's understandable with so many options if you make the choice not to go see it in the theater. If you do skip the theatrical release, however, I would say to find this one when it hits streaming or Blu-ray and give it a shot, if only for a chance to see what may well be the final performance of one of Hollywood's great movie stars. And finally, we have a movie that I think you definitely have to see on a big screen, National Geographic's Free Solo, a documentary about climber Alex Honnold and his quest to become the first person to scale the sheer rock wall of Yosemite's El Capitan without any ropes or safety equipment. This documentary is about more than that quest, though. We also get a picture of Alex himself, his upbringing, his unique personality, and why he would be drawn towards doing something that even other rock climbers think is quite possibly suicide. Free Solo is directed by documentarians Elizabeth Chai Vasarhelyi and Jimmy Chin. Chin also served as director of photography, and his work as a cinematographer deserves not just major award consideration, but I think major award wins. Free Solo is a stunningly beautiful film, made even more impressive when you consider the massive technical problems associated with documenting a climb, where the tiniest slip-up or distraction could mean death for the subject you're documenting. The final 30 minutes of Free Solo are maybe the most tense and riveting 30 minutes I've spent in a theater this year. I don't think it matters whether you know how the story ends or not. The sheer scale of one man's quest to defeat nature is awe-inspiring. And in a year packed with great documentaries, Free Solo doesn't just stand out in that genre, it's also one of the best films of any genre that I've seen this year, and an unforgettable cinematic experience. If you do head to the theater, though, just be sure to grab some napkins or something on your way in, because your palms will be sweating for most of the end of this movie. I know mine were. Free Solo is expanding to about 150 more theaters this weekend, bringing its total count up to around 300, and will continue to expand in the coming weeks. Find this movie and see it on the biggest screen available. I promise you, you will not regret it. Well, that's it for the roundup of just some of the films that are now available. What are some other movies that you'd like to see us cover? Let us know in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching.